Thanks for tuning into the Cocktails with Jim podcast. I'm here with my dad, Dan Callahan, today, and we're going to talk a little bit about his experience as an air traffic controller, and we're going to talk specifically about what his experience was like on 9/11/01. And now, correct me if I have my math wrong, but at that point, by 2001, you had been in the game for close to 35 years, and you were coming up on the end part of your career, right?
Yeah, I had about 5 years left. I had just come off of the road I was working in as a national chair for Air Traffic Supervisors Committee, which ended that January, and I came back to the facility as a first line soup. I was working all along and doing both jobs. It was an interesting time for us. We did a lot of meetings on military bases, and we used our FAM trip privileges once in a while to get here and there. But unfortunately, all that ended on 9/11. What happened that day is I was at my farm. I was just kind of nurturing it and doing things, getting away from work, which I often did. I didn't live there, but I farmed it and worked out there planting trees and things like that. So I heard about it on the radio early in the morning, and then I watched the news. I didn't realize quite what was happening, as most of us did not. It got kind of strange, and a lot of people were worried that other things were going to happen, that we were either going to be invaded or other things would be hit, which they tried to do. It's an interesting fact. We were actually training pilots at Grand Forks that learned some of the basics of piloting and how to fly an airplane, at least get it down to the ground. And some of them were actually in that school at Grand Forks, and they were under our control jurisdiction while they were learning how to fly. So that's kind of a well not known or understood fact, but that's what we did. That school was also open to Chinese pilots at one time. But I don't want to say a whole lot about that because we're here to talk about what happened on 9/11. I rushed into work, but by that time the planes were already down. What happened was the controllers were told to get the airplanes to the closest airport and on the ground ASAP. They were told to land at military bases in the upper Michigan Peninsula. One of the biggest problems they had was a lot of the overseas flights had to land in Gander, Newfoundland, which was a compulsory reporting point for en route aircraft flying over, but they made them land. Some of the places did not have facilities to take care of the influx of people, let alone the number of aircraft that were sent to these places to land. They didn't have facilities to take care of them, a whole lot of things like that. So there are a lot of problems. But they locked everything down tight. It was real tight. Nothing was allowed to fly. And after they figured out what was going to happen, and they had a lot of restrictions for a while on the aircraft and when they could fly, how many could fly, not to create confusion or get the wrong people up in the skies to do us harm once again. What we were very much aware of and cognizant of the fact that we had to protect our infrastructure, we had to protect our nuclear power plants. There are a lot of restrictions and no fly zones around places that had never had that before because they were worried they were going to try and explode things on our electrical grid, namely fly airplanes into these places loaded with C4 or whatever they could do, and then explode them on a suicide mission. We ended up cooperating with the military. We had military NORAD people come into our facility and work side by side with us for about a year and a half. And they were aware of what was going on and helped us clear things through security. So it was a touchy time. People were nervous. People tended to overreact about who could fly where. Sometimes somebody didn't get the word through a notice to airmen that he was not, or she was not supposed to fly through a certain area. So the pilots got written up and they ended up taking their license and sometimes their livelihood away from them. So that was kind of sticky to sort through all that and say, well, somebody just got a wing inside of this cone and they didn't really do it on purpose. They just didn't understand. That was the main thing. But we had to take everything serious. We had to make sure that everything was safe. And we gradually, slowly got back. One thing that happened to me, I ran this thing nationally for the supervisors committee. And I used to use military bases for conferences, and we were getting a pretty good deal. And they were taking care of us, treating us nice. Our per diem went way down, so I was saving money at the same time. We had neat places all over the country, including Minneapolis Reserve Base. We're staying for $6 a night. But that all changed. The bases all got locked up tight for many years. And no one was allowed on unless you were military or had a top clearance to get onto the base. So we were restricted. The other thing that happened to us as air traffic controllers, we were allowed 8 familiarization flights a year. That was a cockpit ride to observe what was going on. And as time went on, it was restricted at first, but it slowly loosened up a little bit to where we could go where we needed to go. But we had to fill out a report and be in business attire and the whole works. But that ended as well. The cockpit doors were closed. The cockpit doors were locked. And it hasn't really loosened up much since. And I can understand that. Flying is not as it used to be. It used to be, you know, a business thing, and it was quite elegant back when it first started. And it has changed with the rates and the fares and everything changing. You're kind of in seating, it's kind of cramped, but you have to get from A to B, and sometimes flying is the best way to go. I've been an air traffic controller. I was for 40 years. I was in the Marine Corps first. I was in Vietnam at Chu Lai with a Marine Air Traffic Control Unit for 2 years. I was over there. I was able to take a leave in Australia, and then I extended to get an early out. I came home and I worked in the ag-related industries, building those wonderful harvest store silos. And then I worked at the sugar beet factory for a while in Chaska, and I was doing double shift for about a month. And they allowed me to do that. I went to college briefly, but then the job came up for air traffic, and because of my experience, I was hired. It wasn't easy at first because I had preconceived ideas of what I was capable of doing, because after all, I was a Marine and I worked at a very busy airport in Vietnam. I got through all that, and shortly after 9/11, I was promoted to operations manager, and I ran an area, 2 areas at first, but then after a while, they were stretching us too thin. I worked the East End in the Upper Michigan Peninsula, Michigan. We had a lot of military when I first started. That has changed quite a bit, and things are a little bit different these days. It kind of took us, I would say 2 years to get back to normal flow of traffic. And then shortly after I left, or several years after I left, the pandemic hit. That slowed everything up again, and they didn't hire. Well, now the FAA needs controllers and the airlines need pilots because they weren't hiring for a while, and the traffic volumes are just about as high as they had been pre-pandemic. In fact, they're getting even busier now, so they need more help. Equipment is still a little bit at a lag, but it has come along. They work hand in hand with the union to make it a safer skies and to make the job better. The job is attractive. I would encourage young people out there, if you have some liking to this. I recruited a lot of young people over the years, and all I say is, look at me. I did it for 40 years, and if I can do it, you can do it. You have to have some baseline smarts, some spatial thinking, and be able to think on your feet and be a little creative. Outside of that, you don't have to be super smart or anything like that, because we've had engineers and pilots come in that couldn't do the job because they couldn't get out of the box they were in. So you have to work that way. I've been in many courses in management and supervision and how to handle this, that, and the other thing, how to get along with the union, how not to harass people. I've done courses in that. I've had a great career and I really, truly love that job. And I retired in '06. I'm a disabled veteran now because I think I drank too much water or something in Vietnam. It's Agent Orange related. So that's about it for the air traffic. It's still a good place. It's a wonderful place. I'll let you know, we've got many facilities in the country, but there are 20 en route facilities. I worked at the one in Minneapolis, is at Farmington. There's one in Aurora, Illinois called Chicago Center, one in Oberlin, Ohio, because that's called Cleveland Center. And there's one in Salt Lake called Salt Lake Center. And we work with the Canadians all the time as well, both Toronto and Winnipeg. We work with larger facilities like Minneapolis, but there are some smaller airports that do not have a radar approach control, that we actually handle the facilities via relay to the ground. And that got fairly interesting as well. I have a lot to say about air traffic. Maybe James will have me do that at a later date. And in the end, I always tell people, I'm just a farm kid. I used to talk to airplanes, and that's what I did. I made no bones about it. I did not bring my job home with me. I never talked about my job. In fact, a lot of the people in my hometown of New Prague thought I used to work at Mid-America Milk in Farmington because I was working shift work all the time. Most of us did. We worked what was called a 2-2-1, 2 swings, turn around 8 hours, 2 days, turn around 8 hours, and a midnight shift. It gave you the feeling that you had an extra day off, but that first day off was like having some kind of crippling disease because you got home at 8 o'clock and you either went to try to farm or do something you probably shouldn't have done instead of going to bed. So my family somehow put up with me, and here I am today. I'll be 77 in June. So thanks for the time, Jim. I really appreciate that. It's been an enjoyable time for allowing me to express myself. Sometimes I say too much, but that's how I am.
Can I just
Thank
ask you 2 quick questions before we wrap up here? Just upon a quick Google search, most people, if you look up air traffic control, it automatically comes up as one of the most stressful jobs ever. What would you say? Obviously, everybody handles things differently, but what can you talk to that point a little bit, just based upon your own experience?
I can talk about it because I learned in Vietnam to deal with that because we were real busy and the monsoon would hit and we would end up with bad weather for those that fly IFR all the time for 100 days. We used to have to bring them down. They came back with battle damage, low fuel. One of the most rewarding things was when I first got there, there was a hospital up on the hill where the 3rd Marine Division was, and there was a whole bunch of helicopters. We had a separate control tower. That was about 2 to 3 miles off the runway. Shortly after I arrived in 1967, all the Marines got pushed north. So the group that was there, they're up around Phu Bai and Dong Ha near the DMZ, and the Americal Division came in with all their helicopters and thusly took over the hospital. We always had Pedro for a rescue helicopter. That's what they're called kind of universally. And the other thing that they were done was when the Army came in, they had a helicopter rescue called Dust Off. They had a red cross in front of the aircraft. I know several disabled veterans that were helicopter gunners over there in the Army. I know one that was a Dust Off medic. He volunteered for it. And now, of course, he's got Parkinson's disease due to Agent Orange. But here's what we did. Dust Off would come in with wounded, and they'd need a precision approach and come down that runway and get them as close as you could. And as soon as they busted out at the end of the runway, they did what they called scud run up the hill and take the wounded up to the America Hospital. Another interesting sidelight was there were two of my classmates from New Prague of a class of 120 that were nurses at that hospital. I never went to see them because the Marine Corps drilled it into you, do not fraternize with officers, and I wasn't going to disobey them. But I knew they were there. One relieved the other, and they were classmates. That was quite different to understand. The other thing that I did in air traffic, when I came into it after I got done working hard on my ag jobs, I got into the job. At first, it's a little stressful because you got to make it through training. And it's like when you go into some branches of the service, they say 10% of you aren't going to make it. And that was pretty much true. It got to a point where the area that I worked in, the bankers in town want to know what area you were assigned. And based on where you're going and what the washout rate was, they may or may not have given you a loan. That's kind of bad, but that happened. I worked through the ranks. I became trained a lot of people. And then when I was a supervisor, I became a training supervisor. So I understand how all the mechanics and everything works along with that. As far as stress goes, what Jim asked before I digressed, it varies in the individual. And I've said this to many people. It depends on how you're wired. It depends on your life experiences. It depends on how you handle stress in general. If you know your job and you understand your job, you're probably going to be all right. And you can deal with stress. Yes, there's very stressful situations when you have weather reroutes, when you're metering to come into an airport, when weather comes up suddenly, or when you're working aircraft and they crash and deaths are involved, which I've been involved in several times, as many of us that were around a while did. So that part of it, yes, but it's minuscule. If you can't deal with it, you take it home with you and you worry about it. I've known young individuals who came into work, and if the weather was bad, they'd sit in their car and they'd get sick and they wouldn't come into work because they couldn't handle it. Or if the stuff, as they say, started hitting the fan and you really got busy, they couldn't cope with it because they got so excited inside, they were starting to make mistakes. You look for the quiet ones. If you look for the steady ones that were there and you could count on them and you knew who they were after you supervised for a while. Not everybody did the job at the same level. That's obvious in anything that you do. But I would say as far as stress, as far as I was concerned, I might have had a few too many cocktails on the way home, but I never took it home. I never took well, I won't talk about that. But anyway, what I did, I dealt with it. I had the farm, I escaped. I just melted into what I was when I was a farm kid. And I never really felt it that much, little minuscule, but I never let it weigh on me. There were times though, many times after you worked and talked all night that you didn't really want to converse with anybody when you came home. You just wanted to sit home and have some solitude and let your mind be at ease and not be confronted with whatever problems came up. And this kind of created some problems. The other thing that was probably as stressful in everything was the shift work. A lot of you work shift work. I worked shift work for Green Giant when I was 16. And I guess I worked shift work my whole doggone life outside of training and working on a couple of details out of Washington, but it was there. And you dealt with stress. You kind of became different. Yes, air traffic made you think differently, but it should never have made you think you're important or better than anybody else. Yes, we did something unique. Yes, there aren't that many of us out there. And when I was dealing with the soups, there's only about 1,600 air traffic soups in the country at any one given time. As an operations manager, my last 5 years, I enjoyed it. You're working with flows of traffic, trying to keep areas out of trouble. and coordinating, a lot of coordinating to try and keep things at a safe, sane level. That was the most important thing when you're supervising in the area. Pay attention to what's going on, take care of the troops, watch what's happening. Don't let them get in tough traffic situations if you can avoid it. But some of it was tough. Some required you to think way outside of the box. And that's about it with that. I got to know a lot of people throughout the country, and I spent time on a reclassification committee for 2 years. Worked in and out of Washington, but I still had my duties at the facility. I had a very long, interesting, fun career. We did a lot of good things together. And I would say back then we had more of a camaraderie and partnership because we didn't have cell phones and we weren't drifted off here and there. And I guess I have seen things change. I have seen things change because of the pandemic, unfortunately so. And I hope we need to get back to some kind of normalcy. I am not going to make a political statement today at all, but I feel very strongly about certain things. So thank you. Semper Fi, my friends, and you all hang in there because I'm trying to myself. Bye now.
Thanks so much for doing this. This was great.
Well, that went good. Was I fluid enough?